Are you passionate about foreign policy, national security, and the latest in domestic politics? Consider becoming a member of the DSR Network, your go-to source for in-depth analysis and insightful discussions. With the DSR Network podcasts, stay ahead of the curve on global affairs. Each episode features top experts, policymakers, and thought leaders who break down complex issues into digestible, engaging conversations. From breaking news to historical context, we cover the topics that matter most. Whether it's the intricacies of international diplomacy, the latest in national security strategies, or the dynamics of U.S. politics, the DSR Network has you covered. Members receive an ad-free listening experience, bonus content for virtually all of our shows, an invitation to join the DSR Slack community, enhanced show notes for select podcasts, and much more. Visit thedsrnetwork.com/buy and enter code GRADUATE to receive 30% off the regular membership price for the first year or first month. That's thedsrnetwork.com/buy and code GRADUATE. Thank you very much for your support.
Nine, 12, 10, 28, 2, 23.
This is Deep State Radio, coming to you direct from our super secret studio in the third sub-basement of the Ministry of Snark in Washington, D.C., and from other undisclosed locations across America and around the world.
Hello and welcome to the podcast. We are very happy today, and I'm David Rothkopf, the host, to have with us a friend who is prolific, and you may have seen him a lot this week because he wrote a column in the New York Times that just produced a massive reaction, not just in the media. The White House embraced it. It's a really interesting story, and I want to have him tell it. Jeff Sonnenfeld is currently the Senior Associate Dean for Leadership Studies and Lester Crown Professor in Management Practice at the Yale School of Management, as well as founder and president of the Chief Executive Leadership Institute. And the column was called, "I Know What America's Leading CEOs Really Think of Donald Trump." And it was in the New York Times. And congrats on the response. Of course, you produce many columns. You're one of the most prolific guys out there. But this one really seemed to hit a nerve, didn't it?
Yes, David. And usually I do write 60, 70 columns a year, whether or not every now and then I luck out with the New York Times and even the Wall Street Journal periodically. And I don't know, Washington Post or Politico, but I'm a regular columnist for Fortune and Time, Chief Executive Magazine, and corporate board member. So those are places I often go to. But on a lot of those sites, David, we hope and pray that David Rothkopf will pick this up and fan it in his claims. And I must say, this is one where I don't even know if you retweeted it, and I always look forward to that because your followership is so fantastic. We didn't need it this time.
No.
Times we actually got, Stephen is at like 14 or 15 million viewers. No, of course, that's not like the finale episode to The Apprentice where they claim 40 million viewers, but still for something that I've written to cross the 14 million, and that's independent of the Times direct traffic. That's just on X Twitter. So, this one did surprisingly seem to hit a nerve.
Yeah, it did. I think it did because it was a little counterintuitive and it was extremely important. So important that, again, as I said, I've seen statements from the White House in the past 48 hours. I saw an interview with Jeff Zients, the president's chief of staff, all saying, one of our important constituencies and messages is CEOs want stability, they want predictability, they want the rule of law, and anything that threatens that is a problem for them. And that seems to me to have been one of the core messages of your column, but perhaps you may want to dispute that or highlight something else.
No, you nailed it perfectly well. I am trained that his debate prep team, the President Biden's debate prep team, could encapsulate my message at least a third as well, as you just said it in one sentence. In fact, I'm glad I wrote the piece before speaking with you, because you said it annoyingly well, so efficiently. That does capture the essence of it, is CEOs are not xenophobic. They don't want open borders, but they believe in the value of immigration. They support the H-1B visa process, and they know that almost a half of Fortune 500 companies were either created by actual living, immigrants, or their first generation. That a quarter of tech startups over $1 billion are from immigrants, and whether or not it's the hamburger, the Frankfurter, or God Bless America, these are all the creation of immigrants. As we approach 4th of July season, is what we think of these iconic American images or industry is coming from immigrants. So they're not xenophobic. They're not reflexively isolationist. They don't want an aggressive, imperialistic, thuggish Russia under Putin destabilizing the world and violating sovereignty. And that's horrible. So they're not isolationists. They also aren't fundamentally protectionist. They were in the 1940s and 50s, but the business leaders aren't protectionists now. They believe in global trade. And as you said, they believe in the rule of law, and not the rule of law, the law of rulers. And that's what really worries them here. So not a single Fortune 100 CEO is supporting President Trump. It doesn't mean they all love President Biden, but they're not supporting President Trump.
Yeah, but an outside observer may not think that, that they may think one thing or another about that. But, a million years ago, back when dinosaurs roamed the earth, in the 80s, I founded a magazine called CEO Magazine. And so for a number of years, prior to my going into the government, actually, I dealt with CEOs. We did CEO events and so forth all year long. This was not a monolithic group. There were conservative Republicans. There were liberal Democrats. There were activists. There were people who wanted out of it. The engagement of many of them, in fact, in Washington was kind of to play both sides of the track. They would say, we're going to give some money to Republicans. We're going to give some money to Democrats. And it was very rare that you would get any kind of unanimity. And I know this because one of the, not to make the story go on too long, but one of the guys who wrote for me was a guy named Jeff Garten. And Jeff became Undersecretary of Commerce, and he asked me to be Deputy Undersecretary. And periodically, when I was in the Commerce Department, I would get a phone call from the White House. And they would say, please get the business community to do X. And I would go, wait a minute, there's no business. There's no business community. They don't move as a pack. They move in the directions of their self-interest. But in this particular case, what you've got is a really remarkable coherence among the people in this group that is atypical, at least from my perspective. Now, you're the leading expert on CEOs, so maybe you don't think it's as atypical. But I can't think of other occasions when there is this kind of homogeneity.
You framed it so well, and thank you for the salute to Jeff Garten as a former Assistant Secretary of Commerce, and your old colleague, because he was my old boss here and the guy who hired me to come to Yale. So we have that mutual affection for Jeff. But you're right that no Fortune 100 CEO supports Trump. And this has been a product of Trumpaganda to make it seem that, this is the first business guy, the major CEO to become the commander in chief. And we saw some misguided headlines in the Wall Street Journal, surprisingly enough, fueled by Trumpaganda, just propaganda from Trump saying that the CEOs were again flocking to him. They never flocked to him in the beginning. And I was an early critic of the Apprentice TV show, and as part of the Burying the Hatchet, I brought him by to one of our CEO summits in 2005. The major CEOs in the room threatened me that if Trump were to walk in, which he did, that they would walk out, which they did. And some of those people are some of the same people whose names get bandied about as Trump supporters today. They aren't, in fact, but they do try to work with whoever is elected. However, in 27, they didn't vote for him. 75%, 75% of Republicans, of our CEOs are Republicans. And in fact, this is a major break going back, I don't know about Abraham Lincoln, but certainly over a century, the business support enjoyed, but even Abraham Lincoln supported and strong support from the U.S. business community, but nationally, not just in the North in the Union, from William Howard Taft through Herbert Hoover through, Calvin Coolidge, of course, and Ronald Reagan and Bush, the Bushes and Ford and Nixon. They all enjoyed very strong support from the business community. And publicly, of the Fortune 100, it's documented, over half of them financially supported him. It's zero now. It was zero in 2016 when Trump ran the first time. It plummeted to zero. First time in history, over a century. And 2 people supported him in 2020. And now it's zero again. That is quite a noteworthy break. But the Trumpaganda has tried to paper over that to make it seem like he's one of them. He isn't. In August of 2017, they all walked away from him after the equivocation celebrating white supremacists with peaceful demonstrators in Charlottesville as being good people. They left him, first time in American history that we've seen the business community walk away, even under JFK, who called them a bunch of SOBs. This is the first time they've walked away from the commander-in-chief call for national service in his business advisory councils. And in November of 2020, they're the first group, even before Senator Pelosi and then Speaker Pelosi and Senator Schumer could celebrate the Biden-Harris certified win in November. They are the first to speak out and certify it, and then they called for his impeachment in January 2021 at one of our forums with a unanimous vote.
Yeah, well, I mean, Trump sold himself on The Apprentice as being a big-time CEO. But he was no more a big-time CEO because he played one on a reality show than Dennis Rodman was a big-time diplomat because he went to North Korea once. And Trump
didn't color hair, I think, at that time too.
Yeah, well, and they're close. I mean, I think at one point I just read that Trump thought about giving Dennis Rodman an official diplomatic job. But having said that, we do read about certain CEOs, and I'm not just talking about the pillow guy, but we do read about certain CEOs being supportive of him. Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, some of these folks. There is a kind of actually in, among some people in Silicon Valley, there does seem to be a kind of an appetite for a kind of, I would call it hard right, semi-authoritarian reset. And there are some people on Wall Street, we've seen equivocation from, Jamie Dimon of JP Morgan. You hear things that are, that seem to sort of smooth it over, and we could handle another Trump presidency. And Trump jumps on that. That's this Trumpaganda, and he says, "See, the business community is behind me." To what do you attribute these kind of outlier voices?
Well, thanks. First, you're right. They are outlier voices, and to pick on some of the particular names you tossed out there, you're exactly right. The Trumpaganda would like to create a haze around them. Jamie Dimon was one of the few to actually, even before the defense of democracy by the U.S. business community, which, by the way, is a more trusted set of pillars in American society than, sadly, any of the rest of us, academia, the media, the clergy, state, local, federal officials, other than the military, which can't weigh in here, is CEOs, as the Edelman Trust Survey tells us, especially, quote, my employer and my CEO, are the number one most trusted pillars in this survey of 34,000 respondents. That's like years of Harris and Gallup data combined. The Edelman Trust Survey is the gold standard. And CEOs, but these particular ones, Peter Thiel has rescinded his support. Now, Trump doesn't brag about that, but they did. Larry Ellison, the founder of Oracle, he stayed silent, and his son is with with Larry Ellison's money is actively supporting Biden. And in fact, you go through the tech community. Who is David Sack? We don't know how much money he even has in his sack, but not a single one of your viewers, and I bet your life on this, has ever heard of David Sack until he wound up, hosting this event. But who was not there, who's been a Biden supporter? Lorraine Powell Jobs, Bill Gates, Melissa French Gates, Sam Altman, Eric Schmidt, Sheryl Sandberg, Reid Hoffman, Reed Hastings, Sergey Brin, Vin Khosla, Marissa Mayer, Meg Whitman, Steve Ballmer, Jerry Yang, Roger McNamee, James Murdoch, John Doerr, Alan Patrikoff, Josh Bekenstein, about anybody, Frank McCourt, anybody you would think of in the tech world, they're not supporting Trump. You do have some outliers. So who knows? And the Jamie Dimon reference, which I knew personally and directly that he regretted what he was explaining, is everything Trump did was not wrong. And frankly, I agree with that. And so do a lot of people in the Biden administration. Even some of the diplomatic stars in the Biden administration have now come around a little bit late to recognize the brilliance and wisdom of the Abraham Accords. It was Jared Kushner, a perfect person. I don't know. I'm not a perfect person. But the Abraham Accords pulling together all the Gulf nations, the Arab Gulf nations, none of which support Hamas, by the way, with the exception of Qatar, with Netanyahu's encouragement, is the overwhelmingly that was a good idea, and some of the criminal reforms that maybe Trump didn't have a lot to do with, but were under his administration, but Kushner pushed through, were good. Ultimately, they loosened up on immigration, which was well past due. And I don't know, what else did they do right? Probably their Iran policy was more right than wrong. I think John Kerry was pushing an open-minded way for yet one more fateful try to work with Iran, despite former Secretary of Defense Ash Carter saying that was pathologically wrong. John Kerry every now and then gets the upper hand, and we've made mistakes with Iran.
Well, I don't agree with your assessment of Trump-Iran policy, but we're entitled to disagree. I do agree with.
The idea of that was cutting off the spigot of support. No, I
agree, but I'm just saying, getting out of the JCPOA was not a great way to contain Iran's nuclear program, as Iran's progress since they got out of it.
The trade sanctions is that we loosened up on the. I won't take a position on that, but I'll just say loosening up on the trade sanctions. There was no money for Iran was circling the drain economically under Trump. It's just painful to say something pleasant that happened then. I'm sure he was not aware of what they were doing, but that cut off funds to Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis.
Well, Trump has a very innovative set of views on trade policy. You may have an opinion on this. He said that he wants to eliminate taxes and just charge tariffs.
It's absurd. It's highly inflationary. For one thing, not only does it conjure up the Smoot-Hawley tariffs of the late the 1920s that helped trigger the Great Depression, but the 10% across the board, everywhere, all the time, 24/7 is ridiculous. Is all the mainstream, centrist, non-denominational, nonpartisan economic forecasts say that would drive it up 3%. 16 Nobel Prize winners say even more, drive up inflation of 6% and crush the economy. And that's before we had to deal with the reciprocal trade sanctions that block U.S. product from getting abroad. That is ridiculous. That's one of many almost Marxist MAGA platforms they come out with to create a new Iron Curtain, only with us being the ones dropping the Iron Curtain.
Yeah, I mean it's sheer lunacy. People often talk about how inflationary it is, and that the burden of most of these costs would be by consumers, which is spread across society. The benefits will be felt by the top of society, and that's a Trump pattern. Do you personally think that the views here of CEOs will have much of an effect? And the reason I ask is, one of the very best people I know, because I come from the foreign policy community, we sort of celebrate bipartisanship in our history, if at least not at the moment. And one of the very best people I know from a Republican administration is Josh Bolten, the guy who was chief of staff under Bush, and he leads the Business Roundtable, and the Business Roundtable CEOs all got together with Trump. Now, some reports came out of the meeting that Trump rambled and was kind of incoherent, but nobody came out of the meeting and said, we can't support this guy. And the question is whether the business community is actually going to play an active role opposing Trump.
The Business Roundtable doesn't take a position on partisan politics per se. You wouldn't have an endorsement or a condemnation coming from them. The fact that he spoke there didn't mean that a single person in that room came to hear him. It was a regularly scheduled quarterly meeting, and President Biden was invited to attend too. But had attend to more important matters, which was the G7 meetings in Italy. And Jeff Zients, his chief of staff, did a very capable job of representing the White House there. He got no applause other than a polite exit applause. I would applaud his exit too. But none of his proposals were well received. People asked him, "You want to cut the corporate tax from 21% to 20%, and like, what difference is that going to make? Why?" And he said, "Oh, because it's a nice round number." And that kind of stuff just landed with a thud. It was ridiculous. So nothing went over well. The regulatory reforms he thinks they want. Who are the biggest defenders of the current environmental protections that we have? It's not just that we're looking at the Sierra Club or the Wildlife Foundation or somebody like that. Is that it is the major utilities that have already invested their money and as well as the extractive industries that fought the Trump administration's effort to roll it back, as well as the auto industry on the clean air standards. And of all things, the Trump Justice Department, the antitrust division under Trump, sued these industrial leaders for colluding in the public interest, for wanting to maintain the Clean Air Act standards. And it is ridiculous. So no, the Business Roundtable has not supporting him remotely, but they always have a history of inviting the candidates from both parties to speak, who are the presidential candidates. So that's all they did, and I don't think that John Bolton offered any endorsement or special welcome to Trump.
Yeah. Now let me sort of shift the focus slightly. But staying with the same general theme. You know, we hear a lot about the influence of Trump and Trump policies when he was president. And then we hear a lot about his legacy in places like the Supreme Court. And notably, that leads to a discussion about the Dobbs decision and the end of Roe v. Wade, and social issues. But this Supreme Court has taken, and in fact has taken today, more decisions that essentially make it harder for the federal government to regulate. In the decision today, they make it harder for the SEC to regulate. We're waiting for a decision regarding a big issue called Chevron deference, which if they eliminate that, it's going to make it harder for the federal government to regulate anything. Now, this would seem to me to be something that's enormously consequential economically. I think it produced a big windfall for companies and shareholders, but not, also consequent bad consequences for people at large. But it seems to me the kind of thing that the business community would go, "Oh yeah, less regulation. I like that." How do you view that? How that anti-administrative state bent of the Supreme Court resonates for Trump with the business community?
I think it varies. If we were to take a look at some of the particularly onerous, if not even horrific categories of decisions, the Supreme Court's own jihad against the judicial system is the number one biggest problem. The fact that they would not even understand the Constitution, and this is all three of the liberals too, were perhaps as embarrassing if you were to talk to Professor Larry Tribe or Judge Ludig, you'd find they're horribly misinformed. And I don't know if those three the quote unquote liberal justices were suffering for Patty Hearst type Stockholm syndrome, but they were so trying to suck up to the conservatives that they so fundamentally understood the eligibility issues for President Trump to even run. And the foot dragging right now over getting a decision out. There was a unanimous decision of the D.C. Appeals Court affirming the district court decisions about that nobody is above the law, that a president for non-presidential decisions and actions can't be held accountable to the law is horrific. So that worries me more than anything. The second category, of course, is I think many CEOs, men and women obviously included, are alarmed at the intrusion in control over women's own healthcare decisions. And of course, the reversal of Roe shows that some of the Supreme Court justices actually lied in their confirmation hearings, perjured themselves. That's the second concern. The third one, of course, is the grift and the accepting of the money. Initially, two of them in particular of the benefits. A fourth area where he gets to the nub of your question in terms of the administrative state being able to function and interpret the laws of Congress as they're supposed to do. I worry a great deal about the Food and Drug Administration being undermined in their ability by Trump appointees to make decisions. When it comes to the SEC, I think Gary Gensler is fantastic and gets 99% of the calls exactly right. And I can't think of a better SEC chairman we've ever had. I was very close to the late Bill Donaldson, our founding dean, but Gary Gensler, I just think is the smartest and boldest perhaps we've ever had. But he's not exactly right, I think, as I understand this latest decision you're referring to on the zealotry of the profiteers of good governance that cloak themselves in the public interest and actually come out with a form of corporate extortion in the shakedowns of these proxy rating firms of ISS and Glass Lewis. These are for-profit enterprises that operate in shadowy ways. And the law that has been, as the law has been affirmed right now, overruling Gary Gensler, is that they too are being held accountable to transparency standards and need to reveal when they come out with a judgment, as say Consumer Reports that would say that toaster doesn't work. Consumer Reports will tell you that the toaster maker says it does. These proxy rating firms don't want to tell you what the victim of their rating says that they get it wrong. A lot of times, for example, when they went after ISS, their numbers were wrong when they were evaluating Bob Iger's reign at Disney, and Bob Iger wanted to get out to the shareholders. Wait a second, they're looking at the wrong years. They're looking at the period of time when my successor was running Disney. They should be required to be held to those transparency standards. So in this case, Gensler got it wrong, and I believe amazingly the Supreme Court got it right.
Yeah, although I not to be, arguendo on this, but there was also a decision today, and I know we're talking, so you can't sort of be following Twitter, although maybe you could. There was also a decision today that blocked the Biden administration rule that would mean stringent new emissions requirements on power plants and pipelines. There have been other decisions in the past.
Yeah, that's terrible.
There is this big Chevron deference thing looming out there. And so I just think this is an area where the Trump legacy, which is to say the legacy of this court, could change the regulatory environment for the United States for a long time to come.
It's horrible. And some of them are so young, too, on the court. It's really worrisome, like Judge Eileen Cannon, who's not on the course in the Supreme Court, but is a very young district court appointee. We're going to be haunted by the ideological legacy of these Trump appointees for a long time, and that's a big problem.
Yeah, and Trump, there's already talk that Trump would, if he were elected, seek to replace Alito and Thomas with younger people quickly, because they're older people.
And that is normal. And the business community hates that. They hate these wedge issues. As you know so well, when Alexis de Tocqueville came to this country in 1840 to write and wrote Democracy in America on what makes the U.S. judicial system work.
Well, you say I know that, so I wasn't there for that. I know there many people think that I was, but I wasn't quite born yet.
And what Tocqueville said though, that you remember from your erudition is it is what makes our legal system work isn't the tightness of the laws, but their looseness. And it's people in civil society, like CEOs, and particularly talked about business leaders, that fortify the community's trust in the legal system to interpret these loose laws the right way. Getting back to this just judicial system question, and he called it this public trust. He called it social capital, and he said it was as important as financial capital. And CEOs know that. They don't want the fabric of society torn apart by these wedge issues that are marketed just to do that.
Yeah, no question about it. So, as we look forward to the debate tonight, because I feel obligated to end with a kind of a, on the newsier note, what are you looking for from these guys when it comes to economics or business issues? I mean, Trump will talk about, he'll lie, and he'll say that things were much better under him. Hopefully Biden will challenge that. And Biden will undoubtedly bring up this crazy tariff plan. But what else could we see?
Biden's got to not be on the defensive. George Washington, and not some sports coach, was the first one to essentially say the best defense is a good offense. Biden's got a fantastic track record, and he shouldn't have run away from Bidenomics. Some of his cabinet members do. She's got nothing to be apologetic about. This is the lowest unemployment that anybody in the workforce has seen today, at 3.8% unemployment. That goes back to when Bonanza was the number one TV show.
That I remember. Okay. That I remember.
Not Tocqueville, but you remember Hoss.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I remember Hoss, but not Tocqueville. But that was, that's that 3.8 unemployment it takes us back pretty far. To have inflation as low as it is fantastic. And the economy's been growing. That's remarkable too. And this is despite economists on the left, right, and center saying we had to have massive 10% unemployment to bring down inflation. We didn't need to. In fact, they were wrong. Something that they used to worship called the Phillips curve died 45 years ago. There's no trade-off between employment level and inflation, and we've just now proved it yet again for the 45th year in a row. That's really important. Then also that the growth that the World Bank says that the U.S. Growth forecasts are driving their global growth forecast. That's fantastic. So the economy is great. And Biden has actually cut the deficit by $1 trillion. Trump tripled it. That's getting confused by propaganda. And the debt, it's up around 15%. It was up 100% under Trump. These are important contrasts to make. But most importantly, the good offense is to go after Trump, is look at the inflationary aspects of his proposals, but also look at his track record. The reason we have any inflation is because he drove us off the COVID cliff into the greatest economic collapse in the post-World War II era. Even the financial collapse didn't give us a recession as deep as his did. And it was because he was busy out there on the golf course 450 days, literally a third of his administration. He has been on the golf course. Nothing like that. That's both Bushes combined. Clinton and Obama don't equal for over 4 years that he put in on the golf course and eating chocolate cake on the side and telling people to inject bleach and hydroxychloroquine in their veins instead of handling the scientific management of COVID properly. So he drove us into a situation where, of course, prices were low. Some of them were so low, like oil, it was negative. Not a single one of your viewers can tell us when in world history we've had oil being negatively priced. So, of course, there's going to be inflation from that as a yardstick, as a benchmark, but it's come down to just about everything except maybe, eggs, where the yoke's on him. Is with eggs, we have 100 million chickens in the last 4 months, hens. That's a third of our supply, 30% of our supply of eggs disappeared. So, of course, that's gone up, but that's not a fiscal policy. And housing is high, but that's the Federal Reserve with 11 price hikes. That has nothing to do with Biden, or that's independent Fed. So those are, the issues I think that we need to clarify. And I sure hope they don't spend a lot of time wrongly beating up on CEOs with a misplaced 1930s concern over which side are you on ideology. This is not a class-driven society. We're not social castes. There's a lot of fluidity in social class in America. This is not Europe. And I sure hope they don't go into some patronizing cliches driven by rich Biden advisors that think this is how I connect to the quote unquote working person. Who the hell's a working person? Do they not consider a software programmer or an architect or a hairdresser a working person just because they're not bringing a lunch pail to an assembly line? That's 6% of the workforce that some of your advisors are driving them to address. CEOs are the most admired pillars in society. There are scoundrels there, but there are also scoundrels in the clergy and public office and the media. We have to root out the criminals and people of low moral pillars. Human beings are frail, and we have failures in every sector. But CEOs as a category are still continue to be the most admired. So I hope Biden doesn't take those CEOs and their loyal employees and independents off the cliff tonight by using them as a foil and acting as if they are Trump's friends. CEOs are not Trump's friends.
Yeah, no question about that. You didn't speak to other things you could have, job creation being one among them. But, I would say, I'm going to ask you one more question. But I would say, listening to you, one other thing strikes me, and it's almost as if, we compare Donald Trump's strategy as CEO of the United States with Joe Biden's strategy of the CEO of the United States from a purely economic, but also by knock-on effect social point of view. Donald Trump is of the school that you borrow and you essentially lie to the public about what your product is. This is kind of the archetype of sleazy business practices. And when he does increase the deficit, he's not increasing the deficit in order to invest in something important. He's providing a dividend, a tax cut to the top 1%. Joe Biden, again, against the advice of a lot of people, including some Democratic neoliberal economists, said, no, I'm going to take a different approach. I'm going to invest in America. To the extent to which, and there's been any increase in the deficit under Biden, what you have to look at for it is an investment in infrastructure, an investment in technology, an investment in American people, in green energy and green technology, sort of the future of the U.S. economy. And the other thing that strikes me about it is that Biden has embraced something which neoliberal economists have eschewed, but a lot of CEOs like, and that is competitiveness policy. He said, no, we're a country, and the global markets may be zero sum, but countries aren't. And so what we'd like to do is we're going to invest in doing things to give us an advantage, and to give our workers an advantage. And it's been working, as you say. I mean, our recovery is stronger than the recovery of any of the other OECD countries post-COVID. So what do you think of, as the final question, Trump as CEO versus Biden as CEO?
Nobody knows what in the devil the Trump vision, economic vision or societal vision is, other than divide and conquer. Everything he's done has, the way it was modeled by the elimination game on the Apprentice TV show itself, somebody is selected at the end to be a leader by undermining all their co-workers. So there's nobody, they all get fired. So who's left to lead? There's nobody left. And that's how Trump does things. The Mexico versus Canada, trying to pit France versus Germany, and both of them against the UK. His whole modus operandi it did the same thing in the business world. Ford versus General Motors, and Merck and Johnson & Johnson and Pfizer against each other, Lockheed versus Boeing, is that business leaders in American society hates that in general. It's all divide and conquer. He hates alliances, coalition, collective action. So those one-offs are his only model. What did Biden tend to do? He came in there with unifying programs, the initiatives you talked about $1.2 $1 trillion going into infrastructure, and almost $1 trillion, into the CHIPS Act and the Inflation Reduction Act. And these things were extremely successful, and they were bipartisan moves and cross-sectoral moves. That's exactly right. They were foundational and fortifying the strength of the nation. You're also right about job creation, which all parts of America should like, is that's what I mentioned, the low unemployment, but just so you take it from the angle of job creation, Biden towers over that. So you're exactly right. The model here is one of bringing different sectors and across political parties together to build a unified future and investing as we need to in a global marketplace. So, good for you. I should have been interviewing you instead of you interviewing me. I think these are really important points.
Absolutely not. And not only am I glad that I've had the chance to interview you, but I hope we can do it again soon. I think the issues you're bringing up are extremely important issues, and they have to be weighed in as we go through towards this election and beyond. These are by extension, these are the kitchen table issues, the pocketbook issues, the issues that matter for the economy for all Americans. And you frame it so well. So congrats on the success of this column. And hopefully we'll have you back again in a month or two for more of this. But for now, thank you, Jeff. And thank everybody for listening. Each and every Thursday, we've got podcasts that are focused on the campaign. Political podcasts, the Words Better podcast with Norm Ornstein and Kavita Patel, plus the one that I do on the law and politics, the one where we have Simon Rosenberg and Tara McGowan talking about what's going on with the election. And so please join us for that. Join us for everything here at the DSR Network. Thank you. Bye-bye.